Alright guys, so while I'm here and while I've got my notes out, I'm just going to talk about my philosophy, the Desiderata, what I would call jawbonics for our purposes, next here on Jinka Jabo. So I'm going to run through it quickly, just breaking it down into three parts. First, the absolutes, the things that I consider the most important. Then my general viewpoint, and then finally peripheral things, sort of extra things that I think should be part of our lives. But sort of, this is just a layout of my moral system. And to break it down, it's based on a lot of the things that I've already discussed on this channel, including Christian Science and A Course in Miracles, Quakerism, Mahayana Buddhism, James Joyce. His writings were a huge influence on me, just as Walt Whitman and the Transcendentalists and the Quakers were an influence on him. And so it's basically rooted in the English-speaking world, where I'm getting all of this philosophy, but, well, not just all of it, but I also gained from traveling in the East and learning about Mahayana philosophy, going to all these different temples and Confucius and so on. And so it's based on a lot of important leaders and thinkers in the last 100 years or so, especially around the turn of the century. But then also just in general travel, reading fantasy, and including controversially, I would add to the list in my earlier days using psychedelics as part of what built the moral philosophy that I'm going to be talking about in this and in the coming videos. To begin with, in terms of absolutes, as this shouldn't really surprise anyone, I do believe in God. But I approach God in a very different way than many, and it really draws on the previous paths that I had mentioned. And I see the evidence of God as reflected in the human experience, and in the fact that we are able to see and predict and create miracles, and in fact to change within ourselves. And that everyone has a chance, because there is no such thing as self or non-self. To go back to the Diamond Sutra, it's this idea that personhood needs to be escaped, because once we get over that, we will find just pure love and pure radiance and happiness and infinity, and there would be no such thing as death or time. Which leads me to talking about, well, time, distance, ego, all these things are in fact illusions, but we cannot live by the pretense of simply saying to ourselves, well, I'm not really seeing this, I'm not experiencing this. We have to experience time as it happens, and we have to see things up close as they really are. We can't simply avoid looking at something and then say we've overcome the reality of it, or we realize that it's just nothing, or we fall into this absurdist existentialist trap, which I should add to my list above. I would say the existentialists influenced me a great deal. But I do believe in the absolute goodness of good, and I forget exactly how Mrs. Eddy put it, but the greatest evil is just but a shallow antipode. It's just such a mockery of the greatest good, and the greatest good extends infinitely, because good by nature is built on the infinite. And so I do believe in eternity, and I do believe that the only way we can get over this is not simply by going around telling ourselves that, oh, there is no such thing as time, there is no such thing as distance. Anything that happens to me is just an illusion, and, la la la, putting our fingers in our ears, when really the fact is we have to experience life. We have to overcome these illusions through acts of virtue and goodness, which basically every spiritual tradition that I've looked at would agree upon. And this leads me to another absolute, is the fact that we are not victims, no matter how hard life is and what burdens we have to bear. We cannot view ourselves as victims, and we cannot expect to reap any benefit from looking at ourselves that way. And we need to avoid thinking that way, and we need to, with the depth of our compassion, try to understand, or try to at least feel bad over the suffering of others. I mean, it's all virtue. So when I talk about us not being victims, that brings me into the more general moral outlook of jawbonics, Jinka jawbism. And this is a value that for the longest time, and when I wrote my last book, lemon jello bubbleheads, which I'll talk about later. Pacifism was the number one value, and that was a Quaker value. And I don't exactly think that anymore. I think there is such a thing as necessity for fighting, or at least when we look at wars and fighting in the past. I mean, in spite of my travels to some very difficult places like Hiroshima and of course all around Vietnam, looking at the footprint of my country and the damage that was done, I still believe that in maybe 1% of the time there is such a necessity for war. But I'm also very hurt about what I've learned during the protests in Iraq, or the fighting in Iraq when I was going to protest in the big cities back home. And learning about the history of Vietnam really bothers me. But this ties into what I would guess is my conservative politics, meaning that I wasn't that political when I was younger anyway, even though I would go to a lot of political events and rallies and so on. I simply decided that just recently, just looking at the left and the right and how the Overton window has shifted so much, I would consider myself a conservative now. That said, I must put the heavy caveat that I've never voted for a Republican, and in fact, I don't think I've voted in the last decade or so I'm not even sure. I mean, I haven't really lived in America, and that's sort of my justification for it. So that's why it's a more general idea. But as part of that conservative politics, in most situations, pretty much all situations, I'm pro-life, and I'm small government-minded constitutionalist, or however we look at it. I'm still, I believe in multiculturalism, and I believe in studying different languages, but I no longer see that as an absolute necessity. I think people can be fine without it. I'm not saying people would be better off without it, but that's another example where I've shifted a bit to the right. But I would also tell everyone that, I can't speak for anyone else's experience, but going around the world and learning other languages and talking to other people, just as Mark Twain said, it's fatal to prejudice, and it's a very good thing for a person to experience. So even though, there can be such a thing as separate states, there can be, I've seen that living in Asia where, the Japanese are in Japan, the Chinese are in China, it's like, there's nothing essentially wrong with that. And I feel like some of the liberal politics have tried to distort that image, or I'm not even sure what's going on back home anymore since the early days when I was studying sociology back there. And then finally, I guess, like, as far as peripheral viewpoints is, I think that essentially by doing things to your own capacity, by pushing oneself to your limits, you naturally expend that capacity and you're able to accomplish more. And so it's kind of a tedium. You have to keep pushing that rock up the hill, Sisyphus, but you eventually, you do make progress, and we're always in this illusion that we're not making progress. And that's something we need to get over, and we need to start being happy. And I think that in general, it's effective, I think, to fake happiness until you're actually happy, which is weird, and it shouldn't be that way, but that's sort of the placebo effect of everything. It's sort of like the Holy Spirit itself is the greatest high, But these are just some basic moral ideas. I will talk to you some more next time on Jinkajabo. Peace.